Okay, so today we're going to talk about the excretion process that happens in the kidneys, and the first step is going to be the afferent arteriole, in which blood pumps into the glomerulus, and small particles are diffused out because they're permeable. You have all these things going and forming a filtrate, but the larger particles, such as your white blood cells, your plasma, and your red blood cells, they can't pass, so they go back and are recycled into the blood through the efferent arteriole.
Okay, so all the smaller particles will form a filtrate that will then go into the proximal tubule, and the proximal tubule functions for the reabsorption of solutes and everything that the body needs. And so things like salts, amino acids, and glucose will be actively transported back into the capillaries, and then things like water, potassium, and bicarbonate will also be passively transported back into the capillaries and then eventually the bloodstream. And then everything that's left in the filtrate will move into the descending loop. But then also ammonia will be secreted into the tubule because they want to detoxify the blood.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the loop of Henle, and here in the descending loop, the main thing that happens is that water is passively being basically diffused out through osmosis, and this causes the filtrate to be have a very high osmolarity towards the tip, the end. It's going to be really salty at this point. You see a 1,200 osmos per liter, and we go into the ascending loop.
Yeah, and the descending loop, it reabsorbs water because of the aquaporin protein channels. And so now it moves into the ascending loop, which is exact opposite. It's permeable to salts, and so in the thin segment, salts will move out due to passive transport, and then as it moves up into the ascending loop, salts will move out because of active transport because the osmolarity has decreased.
Okay, and now we go to the distal tubule, in which the same process as the proximal tubule happens. We have a lot of reabsorption as well as secretion. The main thing about the distal is that it's used to regulate the pH, and it does that by either reabsorbing or secreting potassium as well as hydrogen and bicarbonate, and all of these is done according to need depending on the pH. So we have a homeostasis of pH levels, as well as we still have your normal reabsorption of salt and water, so to ensure that by the time everything moves into the collecting duct, we have a very high concentration of urea and toxin and a lot of conservation of water.
And then in the distal tube, things like toxins and drugs will also be secreted into the tubule. So now everything that's left will move into the collecting duct, and in the collecting duct, salt will continually be diffused out of the collecting duct into the interstitial fluid, as well as water and urea, and this is in order to maintain that high osmolarity in the interstitial fluid. And so everything that's left in the collecting duct will then make the filtrate, and it'll go into the ureter, which will then go into the urinary bladder and eventually out the urethra, and this basically completes the function of excretion in the kidneys.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the hormones that regulate this entire process, and the first one is going to be known as ADH, and this is pretty much produced by the hypothalamus when the blood is too high in its osmolarity, and that will cause this water channel aquaporin to come to the distal tubule and release more water, reabsorb more water into the capillaries, so that more water is pumped back into the afferent arteriole, and the blood will regain its homeostasis level of osmolarity.
Okay, so the other hormone is renin, which acts as a trigger if blood pressure drops too low, and so this will add aldosterone, the hormone, into the distal tubule, which will add more salt potassium pumps. And so the pumps will cause more sodium to be pumped out back into the blood, as well as water, which will follow in osmosis, and this will cause the blood pressure to go back to normal,
right,
maintaining homeostasis.
Yeah, and the whole process is feedback loop, and it's all used to maintain homeostasis.